Welcome to the This Week in Clean Tech podcast, where each week we speak to a leading CEO, executive, thought leader, or insider in the clean tech sector. Each guest shares their thoughts on recent events, their own clean tech story, and their vision and hopes for the future. This week, our host David Hunt is joined by Lukas Neckermann, author of 3 books on one of our favourite topics. Starting with the mobility revolution in 2014, he's become a constant figure in our smart mobility circle across Europe and abroad. He is chief strategist at Split, a company that matches ride-hailing supply and demand for travel companies and mobility operators, and an advisor to Next Future Transportation, Heliport, Flock, and to us here at Hyperion Executive Search. His latest book is Smart Cities, Smart Mobility, Transforming the Way We Live and Work. Before we start, a reminder that you can subscribe to This Week in Clean Tech via iTunes and all the other usual platforms. But that's enough from me. Let's hand it over to David and hope you enjoy.
Well, so welcome, Lucas, to This Week in Clean Tech. Thanks for joining us today.
It's a pleasure to be here.
So you're known very well as a keynote speaker and author of a number of books in the smart cities and e-mobility space. One of the themes that you picked up on a number of years ago and is getting a good deal of traction and often cited by others now is your concept of the 3 zeros. And I just wondered if you could share a few thoughts or an overview of exactly what those 3 zeros are.
Right. At the time, this was around 2013, 2014, the 3 key themes that we talk about a lot, so electrification, autonomous, and the sharing economy, were pretty much in separate silos. It was very much the electric vehicle group of people, here's the robotics group of people, and here's the sharing economy group of people. And I think the key part that I brought to the table by introducing the 3 zeros with 0 emissions, 0 accidents, and 0 ownership is to say, look, we are all working towards the same set of goals. And these 3 things, whether or not we get to 0 or just some very close approximation of 0, these things are going to change a lot more than just the auto industry. We're not just changing cars from ICE to electric. We're actually changing fundamentally, of course, the energy industry, the way people get and transmit energy, even at a microgrid level. On the 0 ownership side, of course, it's much, much more than just having car sharing or ride hailing and things like that. This is a trend that permeates pretty much every part of how we live and how we work. It's how we acquire talent. It's how we go on vacation. It's how we obviously get around cities. That's the obvious one at this point. But it was just bringing these 3 notions together: 0 emissions, 0 accidents, 0 ownership was, I think, a bit of an aha moment.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And again, these topics as individually come up often as we make progress towards autonomous driving, for example, and there are 1 or 2 areas which get the headlines. Notably, I think the sort of passenger vehicles and the OEMs who are transitioning and trying to keep up with Tesla. But clearly, e-mobility in itself is broad and ranges from ships and planes to scooters. And as you say, it's interlinked intrinsically with all aspects of how we live and work. You clearly are continually doing research in and around electric vehicles and autonomous vehicles. What are some of your recent thoughts and findings?
Yeah, I think it's critical for me to continue doing a lot of research, because the research is the basis ultimately of the books I write, of the speeches that I do, but ultimately it helps me when I advise both big companies and small companies, and of course in my work as a chief strategist. So I'll give you a couple of examples. One is we did an electric adoption index. This was basically saying, yes, we all know that everything is going to electrify, but at what rate and where? And we took 20 cities across Europe. And we said, what are the various pieces that are going to flow into this? So things like congestion charging, things like, carbon-free zones, things like, even, what political parties are in power, things like, of course, fuel prices and then industry protectionism in the various countries, et cetera, et cetera. And then we plotted through 2024, 2026, the progression in various cities. And we did this for a particular OEM client who then planned their volumes, their electric vehicle volumes on that basis on a city-by-city, country-by-country level. So that's one piece of research with a very, very practical application. The second thing that we did very, very similarly is we did an autonomous driving index, and this was once again together with a consultancy that I work with a lot, Progenium. We evaluated 4 countries on the readiness for autonomous vehicles. And with that, we always met level 4 autonomous vehicles. We kind of think level 3 is this, I personally think it's almost a farce because we need to get past level 3. We need to get to level 4 very, very quickly. Anyway, the finding at the time was that the UK was ahead of countries like certainly Sweden, but it was ahead of Germany as well. And for certain reasons and in certain instances, it was also ahead of the U.S., which I think is a slightly controversial finding, but the amount of testing that we have and the testing grounds that we have and also the governmental support for autonomous driving when we did the study was stronger in the UK than the U.S. Now, anytime you do this study, it's pretty much out of date as soon as you publish it. So we do need to keep it alive, and we are working on an update of that study. And it'll be very, very interesting to see because we'll incorporate a couple more countries into that study as well. So that's the sort of research that we did. I did another piece where I was, as they call it, co-rapporteur for the European Commission on a smart mobility policy, where we did some work up and around what needs to happen on a policy perspective in terms of favoring or giving preference for various parts of smart mobility. And that includes everything, electric, autonomous, and shared.
Okay. One of the things I found interesting in the book and in our conversations previously was around your thoughts on cities and mayors in particular in terms of how they in many ways have a greater impact or a greater say in sort of the rollout of some of these technologies than sort of national governments. And again, you see, Paris, for example, doing some great things, particularly in and around sort of scooters and other cities that are sort of leading way in different areas. And again, is that something that you see and from your clients looking at which city regions are more receptive and more able to be the testing grounds for the rollout of some of these technologies and business models?
Yeah, it's not just that cities are testing grounds and fostering the rollout and sources of inspiration and areas of innovation. It's the fact that they're creating and they're determining industry policy. If Paris says we're going to shut down the right bank of the Seine, we're going to shut down the inner city to diesel vehicles, we're going to even shut down the city for internal combustion engine, that creates industrial policy because let's not kid ourselves, Paris is a huge market, it's a very, very significant market, in particular for the French automakers. And as a result, obviously, they're going to change their own strategies. It's the same thing in London. Of course, today we may only have a few percentage points across the UK in terms of new vehicle registrations that are electric. But look at London, we're well into the 2 digits now in terms of electric vehicle, new vehicle registrations. So it creates public policy, it determines public policy because people will look to the big cities for inspiration as well. So that makes mayors Anne Hidalgo or Sadiq Khan, they're very powerful. Let's look to Madrid, Barcelona, Milan, other cities that are implementing congestion charging, and you see congestion charging or shutting down the cities for certain types of vehicles, certain types of day, et cetera, et cetera. And you see that influencing significantly public policy, probably more so than national government. And I think people look to mayors as well for guidance on their day-to-day business and personal decisions, much more so than they do, the national government.
Yeah, I would certainly make sense in many governments around the world at the moment that as you said, there's a much greater connection between society as a whole from at a regional level than there is from a national level. I guess the topic has been aided, if you can call it that, by sort of the huge awareness, if you like, and the breaking point from air pollution, which clearly drives it into the public psyche. But how do you see, beyond the sort of the reduction of air pollution, the sort of change in cities and how citizens will adapt to a more of a mobility as a service type of platform or way of going about your business than what is the status quo at the moment?
So I think air pollution is a key factor because the European Union did a study on quality of life around various European cities, and they found that in a number of cities, air pollution was a top 3 concern for many of the residents, even ahead of such things as infrastructure, schooling, jobs, healthcare, things like that. People were more worried about the air that they breathe, and rightfully so, than they were about any of those things. And that makes it a top election issue. It makes it a top policy issue as well. And I think it's fair to say that quality of life is the single determining factor on whether or not a city is going to be successful going forward or not, because it's what attracts business, it's what attracts people, and people attract businesses. So that's the first point. More generally speaking, I think we have an opportunity for cities to influence national policy as well in terms of the innovation. If you take a look at, once again, using Paris as an example, they have one of the biggest incubators around. And that incubator is going to create new businesses that then roll out outside of the cities. And I think that's the next great frontier. So, yes, people living in cities are the first to use ride-hailing and car sharing and things like that. But the next great frontier is out in the countryside. We don't have the offerings yet of ride-hailing somewhere in a 5,000-person village, somewhere in the UK, somewhere in Germany, somewhere in France, or those listening internationally, in the heartland of the state. But that is the next great frontier. And the reason it can work is because these things have been tried, they've been tested, they've been adopted by early adopters and innovators, and have rolled out in the big cities. And now when you get to the countryside, you get 30, 40, 50% of the people using, you start getting significant numbers. And it makes it attractive as well for mobility companies, for example, to set up shop in smaller communities.
Yeah, we're already seeing that actually, as you pointed out, as much as we spend time in London, our head office is in Liverpool, and it's a relatively small city of about 300,000 people, but there are already starting to be a number of ride-hailing apps, both in terms of from a car, if you like, but also in terms of some public transit as well, minibuses and the like. So as you see, that does scale down, and hopefully at some point, as you say, further into more rural areas.
That's the idea. And I think we're going to start to see communities being built on the premises of smart energy, smart mobility, and there's a real opportunity, and we're seeing that now, and I'm working together with a team to explore that, to change people's behavior not when they already live there, but as they move in. Mm-hmm. Anytime you make a fundamental life choice or something happens, people get married, people get divorced, people have kids move out, new job. Anytime people move, they reevaluate certain choices in terms of how they get around, how they live, et cetera, et cetera. So if people move to a new community and they find that community has car sharing, has ride hailing, has a shuttle to the train station, has solar on all the roofs, energy storage, et cetera, they will decide, maybe I don't need the second car. Maybe I don't need a primary car. Maybe I don't need a contract with a major energy provider anymore because I can be self-sufficient. All of those things that they are able to choose as they move in, as opposed to making a change in their behavior in wherever they live now.
Already there. Yeah, sure. I want to pick up on something you mentioned there, Lukas, and going back to cities and around sort of the competitive nature, and it's something we certainly see in cities are keen to attract the top talent. They are keen to attract the top businesses, and it's something we've Hyperion worked with a number of US, Korean, Chinese companies entering Europe for the first time, and part of the question is where do we go? Where is the best talent? Where is the best place to live? Obviously, affordability comes into that as well, but there is a good deal of competition amongst cities, and perhaps that drives some of those innovations to make cities more livable.
Yes, I think one of the things that cities have done well historically is grow. One of the things that cities have trouble with is adjusting and shrinking, and we saw obviously the example of that with Detroit. It had to go through a very, very bad time before now having its resurgence, and you see that in a number of different places. Now, why do they actually have to shrink? Well, ideally they wouldn't, because a growing population, growing economy needs strong, vibrant cities, and it needs to get there by innovation, by creativity, by attracting the best and the brightest, and that means people, but also companies and in particular startups.
Sure. Okay. So that leads the conversation relatively well to one of the other things that we wanted to talk through, which is, and again, because you've experienced both large companies and startups and places in between in terms of how they innovate and how they operate in what is increasingly a super dynamic environment where things are changing so rapidly. So what are your thoughts in terms of not necessarily who went out, but how companies, large or small, can adapt to the current situation?
I think, first of all, let's think about this large company versus small company dynamic as being one of scale versus one of speed and efficiency. Mm-hmm. That's not entirely always true. There are fast and nimble large companies, and there are small companies that are not as fast as they should be. But as a general rule, what we find in large companies with greater structures, greater policies, greater number of procedures in place is that people delegate decisions upwards. So I was an executive, and people would come into my office and say, hey, we need you to decide on this or that. And I said, well, what's right for the client? What's right for the customer? And what do you think is best for the company? Well, I think we should do this, but you have the delegated authority by virtue of the company's policies and procedures and authority matrix, et cetera, to make that decision. I'm not able to make that decision. I said, okay, fine, I'll make that decision. I'll make it exactly the way that you recommend, because you are closest to the client. You know exactly what the client wants, and you know if it's good for our business as well. And the net result, of course, is that it takes my time as an executive, but it also takes their time to prepare that meeting and to prepare and all of that, rather than making the decision at the source. And this is the sort of thing that comes with scale, and it comes with the territory of a big company. But in a small company, you don't delegate that authority upwards necessarily as much, because, well, where are you going to delegate it to? So what it does then in a big company as well is we see the executives spending even less time with the things that they should be doing, running the company, A, B, with clients, and C, thinking about the future of the company. What do they do then? And this is almost shooting myself in the foot here. They delegate it to consultants. They delegate the thinking and the future mindedness to consultants and say, here, tell me what's coming down the pipe and help me deal with it. I'm busy over here fighting fires.
Good operational stuff. Yeah.
I'm not of the illusion that any one of my consulting clients has the intelligence, the ability, the creativity to think about any of the things that I think about. I think any of them could do it, but they're just pressured to do other things because, again, they're making decisions that should be made at the base, A, and B, they're fighting fires. And that means, C, that they're delegating their core responsibility, which is to think about the future of the company. And I think that's a bit of a shame. And that's one of the dynamics of a large company versus a small company that perhaps we need to address going forward.
Sure. And it's certainly something I think that I've seen over the years changing. An example at the moment, there are a couple of utility companies. I'll mention one because they're a client, which is Energy, who we've just recruited at Hyperion, a CEO for their mobility business in the UK, who are clearly a large global utility, who are delegating and creating sort of smaller businesses and being quite nimble in doing so. Another utility who I won't mention, we're attracting a lot of individuals from that company because they're seeing stagnation and no decisions being made and the market shifting from beneath their feet. Do you point to or see any particular reason why some companies get it and some don't? Why some companies who invest in startups stifle them and why some enable them to flourish?
So I've worked inside of one car company, and I've worked with almost all of the big car companies, certainly in Germany, and I see very, very stark differences. So there's one, and I won't name names here, that says, look, anytime we have something innovative, we're going to do a skunk works. We're going to do a shop somewhere. We're going to put them in a warehouse. We're going to put them in a separate building and let that innovation flourish and let that develop without too much interference from senior management. We'll ask them to report. We'll ask them to give us, information about what's going on, and hopefully it will be well invested. And they, at the same time, accept that sometimes it isn't. Another one said, well, anytime we get some new idea, we want to integrate it as soon as possible. I said, well, wait a second. As soon as you integrate, and that is if you buy a company or if you have entrepreneurship, and in the sense that the new idea is coming from within the company and it's being developed, you need to give it time. You need to give it time to develop as a concept and to grow. And because you don't know yet, is this going to be a monster or is this going to be a mouse? Give it the time, give it the freedom to develop, and only then have it impact the wider organization. I think that's a key lesson that we're seeing now. And that's why we're seeing, of course, OEMs, but other companies as well, Energy too, setting up venture businesses. That's not just to go out and purchase startups, although that's a great vehicle by which to bring in innovation into the organization, but again, give it time, but also to ideally spit out ideas from the core business, let them flourish, run them like a venture-led business as opposed to a corporate-led business, and then reintegrate it as a core part of the strategy going forward.
Sure. It's a very disruptive time, and it can be very challenging for the reasons we've touched on for whether it be a utility or an auto OEM to pivot or change direction quickly. I should say some seem to be better able to do that. You've now, again, you touched on that experience from working with some massive insurance and auto companies, and now you're directly involved in a variety of capacities with a number of startups in and around the mobility space. What do you see as the sort of the key creative or innovative reasons for startups being more active or certainly getting more of the headlines and much more acquisitions, it seems, in the last 2 or 3 years by larger players than perhaps in the 3 or 4 years before? That's anecdotal, rather than evidential, but what do you see as the zeitgeist at the moment?
We need to see that the traditional boundaries of industries are breaking down. So there used to be an energy industry, there used to be an auto industry, there was an infrastructure, there was a public transport industry, there was maybe even an entertainment industry. Those boundaries are blurring because we have this new animal in the middle, which is we'll call the smart mobility ecosystem. I don't want to call it an industry because it's not an industry. It's this, if you think of a multi-tiered three-dimensional Venn diagram, it's something that takes from various parts of each of those former industries. And the status quo companies within those industries are coming to grips with a different language. You know, if you talk to people in the car business about energy, most of them don't know the language. They don't know the KPIs. They don't know what makes the energy business tick. And that's not a criticism. That's just a fact because of the way the car industry has grown, the energy business has grown, and vice versa. You don't find a lot of car guys or motorheads, if you will, in the energy business. But you need someone to bring them together. And I think what startups bring to the table is the flexibility and the ability to speak or learn the language of various industries and to bring various industries together. And that's where you get new businesses taking shape, whether it's in the charging, whether it's in the energy storage, whether it's in the community development area where you have energy and mobility and infrastructure, the built environment and architecture and urban planning, et cetera, coming together to create something new, to create a new ecosystem of ideas, of concepts, and of businesses.
Okay. How do you see, or what sort of recommendations would you give to larger companies? You touched on sort of entrepreneurship, and again, I've come across one or two individuals who are exactly that within a larger organization. But where can companies sort of get inspiration, enable creativity, and give legs to sort of fresh thinking and to fresh technologies?
I think historically there have been some companies who've done that very, very well. I recall even in business school we talked about 3M, which gave its staff 1 day a week to just work on stuff that's completely outside of their core task. And you say, wow, you're taking away 20% of their productivity. No, you're not. You're creating freedom to build business models for the future, and certainly any company who's adopted that and made it part of their DNA, and that's an important thing, because you can adopt a policy, but that doesn't make it part of the DNA. You have to do both. Any company that has, I think, has done well, because it is built on creativity and has continued to reinvent itself. Give new ideas the freedom to develop and let people do whatever it takes. Go for a walk, take a trip, go swimming, go rock climbing, do whatever it takes to get a new sense of inspiration and a new drive, because it doesn't just help to create new ideas, but it helps in the core business as well, because you look at things in a different way.
So here's a thought, and absolutely on that point, I read recently one of Daniel Pink's books around motivation and innovation, and the 3M was one of the various examples that were cited there. Having sort of been in and created startups and working with a number of startups, the founders of startups clearly have a passion. They're not doing it for free necessarily, but they have a vision or a mission which is beyond. You even heard of Elon Musk this week on the 60 Minutes interview talking about sort of the bigger agenda and driver, which I think is intrinsic to startups. Perhaps more difficult to engender when you're a PLC or you're a larger company where your reason to better is shareholder value, and that's a very different reason for getting out of work in the morning, get out of bed to work in the morning.
Yeah, I think large companies, they in some cases de-incentivize or disincentivize creativity. I think that leads to disastrous results. And the way they do it is by, again, having policies and procedures in place to create a certain way of doing things. And it disallows effectively a new way of doing things. Again, and this isn't new, but it's the reason that, frankly, we're going to get run over by AI. Think about those industries that have a very, very high degree of regulation and a very, very high degree of standardization. Accounting, law, retail tellers, bank tellers, they're all being replaced by robots because we have created that. We've standardized their jobs. We've standardized their way of doing things so much that we can program it. Rather than programming humans, we've now programmed the computers to do what humans used to do. Now, we can lament and moan about that, or we can just move on. You can say, okay, fine. Then let's use that new energy, that new time that we have to build new things. And I'm certainly not one of those people that are saying, well, AI is going to take all the jobs. Quite the opposite. It's going to allow us to be freer, to not spend our time with menial tasks. And I include very often driving among those, because if you think about it, driving is one of the least brain-intensive things that we do. So for me, getting to the point of fully autonomous vehicles is a way of freeing our creativity as humanity.
Sure, and obviously far too broad a topic to discuss here, but I'm often sort of questioned about the future of work and what it might look like as we automate a number of tasks, and as we, in particular things like driving and delivery trucks and a multitude of other things. But I certainly see there's an equal opportunity as issues like that come along, but it is a broad topic. But as we evolve towards the automation of some jobs, we evolve towards sort of autonomous driving, our cities change, our way of behaving as humans probably changes within cities and within what we do. Where are the sort of key issues or areas that you feel as an industry, if you can call the clean tech sector an industry, we need to prioritize, or are the focal areas that sort of open the door to other opportunities?
Well, obviously, we are seeing a lot of things come together. So whereas ride-hailing was one thing and car sharing was one thing, and now we're seeing everything to come together. You can see Lyft or Grab or even Uber move into the public transport space. If you think about why did we need a search for the Internet? 20 years ago, there were enough websites that we could find them ourselves by intuitively plugging in BMW.com or Mercedes-Benz.com or whatever else, and we could find these sites that we wanted to do. Now we need to search them. We're getting to the same point with our apps on our phone, where I have, I think, 40 different mobility apps on my phone, and if I'm in a different city, I'm thinking, gosh, what was it that I was going to use here again? And am I going to do car share? Am I going to rent a car? Or am I going to get a ride, et cetera, et cetera? We are needing a search functionality for everyday life. And we are finding it certainly in voice control, in the likes of Cortana and the likes of Siri and Alexa, where they become life guides. Siri, I need to get to Singapore on Monday. And then, in an ideal world, Siri comes back to me and says, okay, great. I see that you have a meeting at 8 p.m. and I see that you prefer, because Monday it's going to be raining, you will prefer to take a ride hail to the airport. So I've already booked that for you. I've put it on your business credit card because I can see that it's a business trip, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So it preemptively, predictively guides me to the right solution. And everything that happens in the background is a coming together of industries. So what I've just described is just a mobility example. But what if Siri continues to think, okay, well, you're going to be in Singapore or wherever I'm going to be for 2 weeks. During that period of time, I'm going to automatically turn down the heat at your home because I know that nobody's there, et cetera, et cetera. I'm going to cancel or delay your subscription to this. I'm going to let the grocery delivery people know that the regular delivery doesn't have to come, et cetera. So it is a question of getting from responsive to predictive self-learning life guides. And I think the challenge really is to bring those services together, not by creating more apps, but by creating an intuitive, not super app, but a system by which these things play together.
That's an interesting point. I think a lot of people always talk about noise and in the marketplace or whichever markets they're in, and a lot of companies when they're trying to find their way forward, there is so much information quite often. There are so many different thought processes and technologies that sometimes spoiled for choice is quite the contrary. You sort of almost paralysis due to choice.
It's re-simplification is what it is. It's re-simplification from the vast number of choices that we have in these.
Okay. And again, as some of you're very active in a number of ways. Just wondered if there are any particular either technologies and or companies that are really catching your eye at the moment within the sort of the smart mobility or smart energy sector. Going back to sort of noise, there's an awful lot going on, but is there anything catching your eye at the moment, or anybody catching your eye at the moment?
Well, of course, this is where I'm very, very happy to plug the number of companies that I'm involved with. Split is effectively a mobility broker, brings together supply and demand in mobility at the not individual, but the institutional level, at the organizational level. It's the one world of mobility, if you will. Other companies that I'm involved with is Next Future Transportation. Many people have seen them. Interconnecting pods of autonomous vehicles. And the reason that's a relevant and very, very important concept is because it addresses not self-driving cars, and I really hate the term self-driving cars because we should be talking about various shapes and forms of autonomous vehicles, because cars already imply a certain vehicle shape, and I think we need to get beyond that and think about different shapes. Another one that I'm involved with that I'm really looking forward to them having a breakthrough is Heliport. Heliport is a last mile logistics, autonomous logistics solution. And last but not least, I'm involved with Flock as well, which is a pay-as-you-fly drone insurance. So that's getting my plugs out of the way for these wonderful, wonderful, wonderful companies.
Okay, and broader again, because I think that's an interesting thing that comes up often. Everybody talks about electric cars, and it is important, and clearly there's scale there, and clearly there's lots to happen. But as I said before, we're talking to some really interesting people involved in sort of electric barges and water transport, obviously aircraft. But this last mile area is incredibly interesting, as is electric scooters, which is getting a lot of interest at the moment.
Electric scooters are very, very attractive in the sense that they fill a niche that so far ride-hailing has filled and bikes have not. We thought that people would, at the end of their train journey, get onto a bike. In fact, they haven't, for whatever reason. Maybe it's still having to exercise, or maybe it's the availability of bikes, et cetera, et cetera. So we had this spike, of course, with lots and lots of investment into bike-sharing companies, and now really a trough where we're coming to grips with that and seeing where is it relevant and where is it not. We still have ride-hailing average mileage of 1, 2, 3 mile journeys in a lot of cities, and the only reason for that is because, well, maybe people don't have the infrastructure to bike or to even walk, which is certainly a walkable distance. So scooters actually fill that niche quite nicely. I don't have the quote-unquote stress of having to bike. I don't have the space requirement. And I do have the ease of just getting on the thing, getting to where I'm going. So I see that scooters are actually taking from ride-hailing much more so than they are taking from public transport or even bikes.
Sure. It's that last mile thing, and I was in London yesterday, and again I saw a number of people on scooters, and personally I think there's an element of not just the physical exercise, of which many people are shy, but also the turning up sweaty, if you like, or turning up in a disheveled state. But obviously on a scooter or an e-bike, it's you do away with at least that particular issue. But it's interesting to see that. Clearly, there is so much happening. There's, as you say, this convergence of sectors out of silos, and there's an awful lot happening in the electrification field. But can you get your crystal ball out for a moment and just give us some thoughts on where you see the next few years in the smart mobility ecosystem?
Well, electrification is done. It's set. To my mind, we've ticked the box on that. It's going to happen. Whether or not we have an extended or a very short period of plug-in hybrids, I don't know. And to a certain extent, I don't care. I think it's crystal clear with battery prices dropping and charging times decreasing, charging availability increasing. I think a lot of the prejudices against electric vehicles are falling. And the only issue that we'll be faced with going forward is not range and anxiety or any of those things, but it's just supply. We simply don't have enough supply at the moment and enough choice. But with over 200 new electric vehicles coming to the market just in the next couple of years, I think we're going to address that fairly solidly. I don't think it's soon enough. If one manufacturer says we're going to stop developing internal combustion engines by the middle of the 2020s, I think to my mind they could stop today, with certain exceptions. Obviously, not kidding myself that in the wide open prairies of the U.S., the pickup truck with a large engine and high towing capacity probably still will be needed. It's still the most sold car in the U.S. and that'll most sold vehicle in the U.S. and it'll stay that way for a very long period of time. So I think we do have a certain divergence. We have certain use cases for electric vehicles, but broadly those will expand until we have only niches of internal combustion vehicles, just like we'll have a few niches of fuel cell vehicles as well. On the autonomous side, this is the slow cooking frog, right? This is not yes or no. We have been moving towards greater autonomy progressively up to the point that, in the next few years, we will have most, if not all, new vehicles being launched with level 2. And we may get stuck there for a period of time, just like in the airline industry. We're stuck there. We still have a sense that we need that individual in the front pushing buttons. And with that, I'm talking about the pilot. Right? Genuinely, we don't. So we will find plenty of excuses as a society to keep people sitting behind a wheel until there's a greater comfort level with autonomous vehicles. And that comfort level will come when we have experienced them in all other facets of our lives. So we'll see it in public transportation. We'll see it in first in places like parking lots, and we'll see it in controlled environments. We're already seeing that today. The Navis, the Easy Miles, the Locomotors, May Mobility, Voyage, controlled environments where autonomous vehicles will be able to roll out very, very quickly. We'll see that well before we see lots of robo-taxis driving around the streets of London, which I think will be one of the bigger challenges. And last but not least, I think on the sharing side, I think that's something where I'm very, very excited about the prospects, not in the cities, but in the countryside.
That of the ability to conduct without having to own an asset which you use occasionally.
Exactly.
Okay. Well, appreciate your thoughts and insights, Lukas. In the podcast
episode page, you'll be able to find links to Lukas, to his company, and to the books he's authored, which will give you a greater insight into some of the things we've discussed today. Appreciate the time you've taken this morning, and look forward to catching up with you soon at a trade show or an event somewhere in the new year.
Thank you very much, David. I've really enjoyed this talk. I look forward to hearing from you, but also from your listeners, and they can, of course, find me through the various social media channels as well.
That was David Hunt and Lukas Neckermann. We hope you enjoyed the podcast. If you did, please ensure to leave us a 5-star rating if you're feeling really kind, and subscribe to make sure you're notified when new episodes of This Week in Clean Tech is uploaded. If we don't hear from you again before Christmas, I think we have another one coming out next week, in fact, but I shall say it anyway as we are in December. Merry Christmas, and I hope you have a great festive period. But until then, it's goodbye from me, and also goodbye from David, and we look forward to hearing you in the next one.